Welcome back to the channel, and welcome back to the range. If you spend any time browsing the racks at your local gun shop, you are going to see an endless parade of new calibers. The current firearms industry thrives on convincing you that your old hunting rifle is obsolete. They want you to believe that unless you are shooting the absolute newest, most heavily marketed cartridge, you might as well be throwing rocks. But as someone who spends every week testing ballistics, studying terminal performance, and teaching long-range fundamentals, I can tell you that the laws of physics have not changed. When you get out into the field, and you are fighting variable crosswinds, managing recoil, and trying to ethically anchor game, the age of your cartridge is completely irrelevant. What matters is how efficiently that bullet flies, and what happens when it impacts the target. Many of the problems that modern ammunition companies claim to be solving today were actually perfected decades, or even a century ago. Those legacy rounds simply got pushed out of the spotlight by shiny new marketing campaigns. Today, we are heading to the reloading bench to dust off 9 classic cartridges. These are serious weapon systems that earned their stripes through relentless reliability, outstanding accuracy, and devastating terminal performance. They have survived brutal sub-zero hunts, wide-open prairie engagements, and dense timber stalking. Some of them deliver absolute precision with recoil so mild you can spot your own hits through the glass. Others push massive projectiles at blistering velocities that rival anything rolling off today's assembly lines. The gun community may suffer from short-term memory loss, but serious riflemen know the truth. Let us break down why these 9 powerhouses still deserve a spot in your safe. Number 9. The 6.5 by 55 Swedish Mauser, introduced all the way back in 1894. The 6.5 by 55 mm Swedish Mauser is still standing toe-to-toe with modern darlings, like the 6.5 Creedmoor. The absolute genius of this cartridge is its perfect balance. From the elasticity of the brass to the gentle taper of the case and the long throat design, everything functions in perfect mechanical harmony. Because it operates at slightly lower chamber pressures than modern equivalents, your barrel life is vastly extended, and your brass can be reloaded numerous times before showing signs of fatigue. Load a 140-grain horn, a D-Eld X bullet at 2,700 feet per second, and even a factory bolt gun will punch half MO groups consistently. If you need massive penetration, step up to a heavy 155-grain projectile at 2,560 feet per second. That is the exact formula European hunters have trusted for a century to ethically harvest massive Scandinavian moose. The recoil impulse pushes straight back into your shoulder rather than snapping the muzzle upward, making it an incredible platform for mastering long-range fundamentals. The case features an elegant 8-degree shoulder and a long neck, allowing it to feed flawlessly from internal magazines, while leaving plenty of room to seat extremely long, heavy, for caliber bullets without creating dangerous pressure spikes. Even out past 500 yards, you are still delivering over 1,600 foot-pounds of kinetic energy. It fights the wind just as well as the Creedmoor, but it achieves that stability through heavy mass and momentum, not just raw velocity. Whether you are hunting deep timber or shooting vintage military matches at 1,000 yards, the Swedish Mauser proves that brilliant engineering never expires. Number 8. The 25. 6 Remington. If you want flat shooting Magnum performance without the bruised shoulder, look no further than the 25. 6 Remington. By necking down the mighty 30-06 case to a quarter-bore diameter, Remington created a high-velocity laser beam that strikes with brutal authority. Send a 110-grain Nosler AccuBond out of the barrel at over 3,080 feet per second, and your ballistics become incredibly simple. With a 200-yard zero, you are less than 2 inches high at 100 yards, and only dropping about 6 inches at 300 yards. That means if you are hunting antelope in the wide-open plains, you hold dead center and squeeze the trigger. Even in a standard factory rifle, if you glass bed the action and install a crisp trigger, you can easily stack rounds inside of a half-inch. Despite those blistering speeds, the felt recoil is remarkably mild, behaving much more like a .243 Winchester than a Magnum platform. This allows you to absorb the recoil, watch your own impact through the scope, and rack the bolt without losing your sight picture. For heavy black bear, a 115-grain partition moving at 3,000 feet per second will punch clean through thick muscle and spinal columns. If you switch to a 75-grain VMAX, the hydrostatic shock on a prairie dog at 350 yards is catastrophic. Yes, once you push past 600 yards, the lighter bullets will suffer from more wind deflection than heavier high BC projectiles. But inside of that practical hunting envelope, the 2506 delivers more retained energy and a flatter trajectory than almost anything in its class. It also saves your barrel life compared to heavily overboard Wildcats. If you want massive downrange energy without the punishment, this is your ticket. Number 7. The 257 Roberts. Take the legendary 7x50, 7 Mauser brass. Neck the opening down to hold a 1/4-inch projectile, keep the chamber pressures conservative, and you are left with the 257 Roberts. This is arguably one of the most perfectly balanced and polite cartridges ever carried into the woods. You can launch a 117-grain Sierra Pro Hunter bullet at 3,000 feet per second, and it will still be flying above 2,000 feet per second when it crosses the 400-yard line. When you tune your handloads for a quality rifle like a Winchester Model 70, shooting sub-MOA groups becomes boringly predictable. The recoil is practically non-existent. We are talking about roughly 9 foot-pounds of felt recoil in a standard hunting setup. It is gentle enough for a first-time shooter to learn trigger control without flinching, yet it carries enough lethal force to cleanly drop heavy axis deer or even cow elk. The secret to its accuracy lies in the case design itself. It headspaces beautifully off the shoulder, ensuring minimal bullet jump and perfectly concentric chambering every single time you cycle the bolt. Predator hunters absolutely love running 100-grain partitions because they shatter bone structure and exit without completely destroying the pelt. It is also a surprisingly quiet round, meaning you might just get a second shot at a coyote before the pack scatters. While off-the-shelf ammunition can be scarce, handloaders adore this cartridge because it is incredibly forgiving to load, highly efficient, and surgically precise. Long before the current obsession with 6.5mm rounds, the Roberts was already delivering flat trajectories and zero shooter fatigue. Number 6. The 260. 4 Winchester Magnum. Winchester unleashed an absolute speed demon in 1950. 9 with the 260, 4 Winchester Magnum. Chambered in the massive 26-inch barrel of the Model 70 Westerner, it launched a 140-grain Spitzer bullet at an unbelievable 3,200 feet per second. Long-range enthusiasts were obsessed with the ballistics. However, the older chrome, moly steel barrels of that era simply could not withstand the extreme heat and pressure, leading to rapid throat erosion. The cartridge was labeled a barrel burner and largely abandoned. But we do not live in 1959 anymore. With modern stainless steel, hammer, forged, or cut rifled barrels, that problem has been completely eliminated. Load a 140-grain Berger VLD at 3,240 feet per second, and you are slicing through crosswinds at 1,000 yards better than most modern short magnums. If you drop down to a 120-grain Barnes monolithic bullet at 3,300 feet per second, shooting across a canyon becomes a simple point. And, click exercise. I have seen custom bolt actions print 3/8 MOA groups with this exact recipe. The long beltless case feeds flawlessly from the magazine and burns powder with incredible efficiency. The recoil is stout, landing somewhere above the 6.5 Creedmoor but remaining significantly tamer than a 7mm Magnum. Inside of 400 yards, you barely even need to touch your elevation turret. With modern barrel metallurgy, you can easily expect over 1,200 rounds of match-grade barrel life, which is a lifetime of hunting for the average shooter. This Magnum is an absolute powerhouse that deserves a spot in your rotation. Number 5. The 6mm Remington. In 1955, Remington wanted to kill off the 243 Winchester. They introduced this cartridge as the 244 Remington, but they made a fatal flaw by using a 1 in 12 barrel twist rate. It could not stabilize heavier hunting bullets, so the community dismissed it as a fragile varmint round. By 1963, they corrected the twist rate to 1 in 9 and rebranded it as the 6mm Remington, but the initial damage to its reputation was already done. Today, a factory 100-grain soft point will leave the muzzle at 3,100 feet per second, delivering absolute devastation to coyotes well past the 500-yard mark. If you get on the bench and load a 105-grain horn, a DA max with a high ballistic coefficient, the downrange authority is simply spectacular. If you build a custom 24-inch rifle with an extended magazine box, you can push an 85-grain partition to a blistering 3,400 feet per second. The trajectory is as flat as a laser beam. In a properly bedded Remington 700, this cartridge easily achieves half MOA precision. The recoil is slightly softer than the 243 Winchester, Yet it retains significantly more kinetic energy beyond 300 yards. That means you stay inside your optic, watch your own impacts, and deliver rapid follow-up shots. Because of the generous freebore in the chamber, you can safely push max velocities without dangerous pressure spikes. It is the ultimate dual-purpose weapon system. You can vaporize varmints all summer and ethically harvest whitetail in the winter. All with the exact same rifle. Number 4. The .280 Remington. Back in 1957, Remington engineers took the venerable .30-06 case, necked it down to accept a 7mm projectile, and bumped the shoulder forward by about 50,000ths of an inch. They accidentally created one of the greatest all-around hunting cartridges on the planet. Unfortunately, their marketing department completely botched the rollout. If you take a 140-grain AccuBond and push it to 3,000 feet per second, it will easily outpace the .270 Winchester in both trajectory and wind deflection. Step up to a 160-grain partition at 2,900 feet per second, and its superior sectional density will penetrate a .30-06 firing the same bullet weight. If you pull a Remington 700 out of the safe, you can routinely print 3/4-inch groups without paying for expensive gunsmithing. The recoil profile is incredibly manageable, sitting right between a standard long-action and a punishing Magnum. This cartridge burns powder cleanly, preserves your barrel rifling, and makes long-range holdovers incredibly predictable. I know guys who run 150-grain Barnes copper solids at just under 3,000 feet per second, dropping heavy bulls at 450 yards without breaking a sweat. So why didn't it take over the world? Remington initially chambered it in finicky semi-automatic rifles, and later tried to rename it the 7mm Express, right when the 7mm Remington Magnum was stealing everyone's attention. But if you know how to build a load with 60 grains of slow-burning powder behind a bonded bullet, the .280 Remington is a precision instrument that handles any North American game. Number 3. The 7mm Mauser, 7x50. 7mm designed by Paul Mauser back in 1892. This cartridge is the absolute gold standard for achieving lethal penetration with minimal shooter fatigue. It is the perfect balance of polite recoil and savage terminal performance. If you load up a modern 140-grain boat, tail bullet, and push it to 2,800 feet per second, your ballistic tables are going to look identical to today's highly praised 6.5mm cartridges. But the 7x50 7mm holds a distinct advantage when it comes to sectional density. That means the bullet is longer and heavier for its diameter, allowing it to drive straight through dense bone and muscle tissue like a spear. Even if you are running iron sights on an antique Spanish 1893 rifle, you can maintain impressive combat accuracy. Throw a modern optic on a Ruger No. 1, and you are shooting ragged holes at 100 yards. The legendary hunter Caramojo Bell used this exact caliber to harvest massive dangerous game, simply because the penetration was that reliable. If you load a 150-grain Nosler partition at 2,700 feet per second, you are still carrying around 1,800 feet per second of velocity at the 300-yard line. That is more than enough hydrostatic shock to ethically drop a mule deer or an elk. The tapered case feeds flawlessly through controlled round bolt actions. This is the granddaddy case that eventually birthed the .30-06 and the .257 Roberts. But the original still perfectly bridges the gap between stopping power and shooting comfort. Number 2. The 8mm Mauser 7.92x50. 7mm. This is the combat cartridge that dominated 2 world conflicts, and it earned its reputation through sheer, uncompromising reliability. Whether you are pushing through thick timber chasing elk, or sitting in a stand waiting on wild hogs, the 8mm Mauser brings absolute authority. When you launch a 198-grain Spitzer bullet at 2,600 feet per second, you are delivering nearly 3,000 foot-pounds of energy right out of the muzzle. Despite those massive numbers, firing a full-size K98 service rifle is remarkably comfortable compared to modern lightweight Magnums. If you take the time to bed the action and verify the throat erosion on an old CZ 550 or a vintage Mauser, you can easily pull 1 MOA accuracy. As a handloader, this is where the fun begins. Seat a 150-grain Nosler ballistic tip and push it to 2,900 feet per second, and you have a laser beam trajectory out to 250 yards. But the heavy projectiles are where this cartridge truly shines. A heavy bullet retains its momentum, crushing through thick shoulder blades and heavy gristle without deflecting. In the United States, everyone flocked to the .30-06 Springfield, leaving this European workhorse in the shadows. But if you mount a solid piece of glass on a rebarreled Mauser action, you suddenly have a 600-yard steel ringer that commands respect. The case geometry is incredibly efficient, proving that balanced internal ballistics will always stand the test of time. Number 1. The 303 British. A lot of guys at the range look at vintage military surplus rifles like they belong in a museum, but when thousands of Allied troops returned from the trenches, they brought their trusty Lee Enfields back into civilian life. That massive influx of reliable bolt guns is what turned the 303 British into a legendary hunting cartridge across North America. If you hand-load a 150-grain softpoint, you can comfortably push 2,690 feet per second. If you prefer heavy brush busting, a 174-grain round nose moving at 2,460 feet per second hits like a freight train. People love to mock the accuracy of old combat rifles, but a properly bedded Enfield will absolutely hold one, and half MOA all day long. The recoil impulse is not a violent snap. It is a smooth, manageable push that keeps your reticle on target and prevents shooters from developing a flinch. Out to 150 yards, a heavy 174-grain load hits, with the same kinetic authority as a modern .308 Winchester. I have spent time dialing in vintage Parker, hail sporters using modern powders like Varget, and the tight groups you can achieve will make modern rifle owners jealous. If you are stalking black bear, throwing a 180-grain spear hot core at moderate velocities ensures deep, devastating penetration without completely destroying the surrounding meat. Because the action is a on-close design, your follow-up shots are incredibly fast. It might not be the most modern chassis rifle on the firing line, but the 303 British is a proven meat maker that simply refuses to quit. That wraps up our look at 9 classic calibers that prove newer does not automatically mean better. If you know how to build a proper load and understand your ballistics, these legacy cartridges will outshoot most of the guys relying entirely on their ballistic calculators today. If you got some value out of this breakdown, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment down below. Let me know which of these classic rounds you still have sitting in your safe, or if there is a forgotten caliber you think I missed.